thank you, Bob, for joining us today in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and being a big part of the Data Collective, where we speak to like-minded expert people about everything data. So maybe you could start by introducing yourself, talking a little bit about your responsibilities in Guggenheim as their Chief Data Officer.
Well, good. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you guys and spend a couple of days with you guys. That was very enjoyable. We kind of in-depth our conversation around data, and there's a lot of things that I learned along the way, so I just appreciate this opportunity. So I'm the Chief Data Officer for Guggenheim, and I was hired with one job description, and the job description was to manage data. And so basically what I do in the company is I view it as the movement of data from source system, or the supply, all the way through the demand, and my view of the world is that view of the world. And so from there, we could build work, projects, management of data, and we'll get into a little bit more detail in a little bit later.
Great. So in your eyes, what does it mean for a company to be truly data-centric?
To answer that question, we have to think, what do you mean by data-centric? So I'm going to kind of take my filter of what I think that means.
Okay.
And and this could be like an hour-long conversation of how we move an organization from legacy, traditional, all the way to a fully functioning data company that uses it. Yeah. But I think there's a couple gaps in general. One is in the way that we communicate. So we traditionally, organizations, viewed IT, and then they viewed the rest of the business. IT owns data, business tries to consume it, and then there's a little conflict between the two of those, and they're not speaking the same language, and they feel like IT's hoarding the data, and the business is not getting what they need. As a Chief Data Officer, one of the things that I do is try to bridge the gap. I try to collaborate by bringing people, the technology, and then the process together to kind of have a clean view of data from the beginning to the right. So as the data starts, all the way to consumption of data. One of the things that I enjoy in all of this is, and we can get as technical as we need to be, but I always take a people view of it. How do I drive change in an organization? And so to me, it's really about the narrative of, and the understanding of data starting, where it's ending, and what we do with it to consume that data, and to make sure that we have that alignment with all departments.
Okay, so if data is termed then, as it is in the press sometimes, as the new oil, what are you doing to refine that asset, as it were, commodity?
Sure. So you think of oil. It's crude. It's in the ground. It's not consumed. You can't consume it in your car today. So data, same way. They have source systems, whether it's apps that's collecting data, or your admin system for insurance companies, or whatnot. And so a lot of times that data is structured in a way that cannot be consumed, whether it's for predictive analytics or for reporting. And so how we view refinement is kind of a middle layer between where the data is created, the supply, all the way to where it's consumed, the demand, whether it's under AI or whatever metric you want it to be, visualization or whatnot. So the middle layer, then, that refinement process is kind of where I think the magic takes place. It's where data quality is worked, where you can identify data quality issues, where you can actually do some cleanup, where you define the data from a metadata perspective, and then you create the processes that connects the beginning to the end, to kind of create that refinery. And then it's not just a one way, there's a whole cycle to make sure that feedback comes back along to the source system, and now we have this engine that we built that should be running smoothly like what oil does to engine.
Yeah, great.
So is that middle layer, the refinement, is that an underserved area?
So my view of that is, if it's, I like the word served from that perspective, because if you don't focus on it from a strategy perspective, it's going to take care of itself. So you have people that grab data from the source system, and then they may open up Notepad and make changes to it because that's what they're doing, they're refining it. So that area happens if you want it to happen or not. Now, it should be controlled. So if you are reporting financials, and I know people are manually changing data in the middle layer, as a controller, I would be really nervous. And so I think to have that focus of what happens in that refining process needs to take place. And that's really the function of what my team does, is it kind of facilitates that connection between where we are on the demand, that refinement process, and how the data gets stored at the source.
Right, so if it's deemed then as an asset, can it also be seen as a liability?
So yes, it can. Asset is investments on your books that's driving value, investment income or unrealized gain or whatnot. And liabilities are set up on your balance sheet for future liabilities. You know, you want to make sure that you incur the cost of those now and spread them through the lifetime, and that's what you set up on your balance sheet as your liability, right? That's just basic accounting. Assets equal liability plus surplus. So data, unmanaged, untouched, unknown what it's doing, you're going to make decisions on it, you're going to report on it, and if those decisions incur bad results, to me that's a liability, because now you're not managing this data, and then your results, however you want to measure it, whether it's bad choices, bad capital spend, new markets or whatnot, it's all based on information that's not managed. To me, total liability. Another liability part of that is, what if you have duplicate of data? Like, what if it's 10 times the amount of data that you normally need? Most industries, have 1,000 data elements? Why do we have 11,000 data stores? So that creates a liability in itself, just the overhead to manage that. So yes, it could be both asset and liability.
And being in financial services, insurance specifically, I'd imagine the threat and risk of a breach is something that is very serious to your company and your day-to-day operations. How is that liability addressed?
So, every company, so the New York DFS, there's most companies are trying to apply their processes and regulation around that, because that's the most robust view of how to protect yourself from cybersecurity, hacking and stuff. So my company's not indifferent in that. We hired a chief information security officer. We created procedures to make sure that happens. But nothing that you do protects you 100%. Where I lose sleep from that perspective is those duplicative data sources. Do I know where they all are? No. People can grab data, put it in Access databases, and store it on your PC. What if an email comes in that they double-click an attachment, and all of a sudden attacks their PC, and now that sensitive information goes up to the cloud, and I can't stop that. So I do worry about all the different databases, all the sensitive data that I'm not aware of, that my chief information security officer that we work with is not aware of, and what kind of exposure that gives us. To me, that's a liability as well.
Yeah, would you say there's a larger focus on the container rather than the data itself? A lot of the focus is around the security of the box, not...
So there's a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, most companies feel like they're putting technical procedures in place to secure that. And so they take that approach very, very seriously, and my company's one of them. It's very serious. But what happens if someone downloads data on a thumb drive and they walk out with their laptop and then they lose the thumb drive? All that stuff is crap now. All that sensitive data is on the thumb drive that someone could get. So there are discussions. Most of the discussions is in the word sensitive data. What's sensitive? What's not sensitive? What needs to be more protected? What needs to be less protected? But it is a tool-based protection.
Getting to the crux of it then, really, how do you see within the insurance business itself that you're using data in a real competitive way?
So insurance is a lot like a manufacturing company, like a car, like Ford. Ford builds cars, but Ford does not sell cars. So dealers sell cars for Ford. And so those dealers own the relationship with the customer, and they collect all the customer data, and they know how to drive the penetration. So if you look at commercials, it's not Ford running the commercials much, it's the local dealer that's running the commercial. So they have that relationship. Insurance is very similar to that. We have agents that sell our products. They have a relationship with the customers. They actually own the customer more than we do. Now, customers only one data, but it's really hard to start cross-marketing to your customers' other products if you don't really know who your customer is and have that relationship. Yeah. So where I think where we are going and where the insurance business needs to go is to start building that relationship with their customers directly. Banks do. I can bank online. I have that relationship with them. People, millennials, and like yourself, I point to you when I say that. Notice I didn't point to Tristan when I say millennials.
Nah.
Old folks are not going to do this.
10 years ago.
He goes into the bank and actually slips a check in with a slip. You do it all with taking a picture of your check and it's balanced, right?
There you go.
So
on Facebook.
There you go, through Facebook, and let everybody know. So so that generation though, and us too, all joking aside, we're more informed. We have information at our fingertips, and we can make decisions without having full guidance. I can invest, tell them what my risk profile is, and algorithms automatically invest my money. So why can't we do that in insurance? Why can't we have that relationship? If we have the relationships, then we have the data, and then we have to manage that data accordingly.
So is that in context then of a single view of the customer?
That does help. right? But single view, source of truth, I think all of that is illusionary. I think I may have made up another word, so we're going to keep going with that. You know, and so what is the truth, right? You know, I think historically people define that truth, whether it's a single view of customer or a single view of financial data, as a data source. They view it as a table. Everybody accesses the table and no one touches it. The reality is the moment that someone asks a question that table can't answer, they're going to go grab that table, they'll grab another data source. Now they create their own truth that no one else is using. So what's the commonality in all of that is the metadata. It connects it, it understands it conceptually, logically, and physically where the data is flowing. And so that, you know, we talk about this is really this true source of truth. Now, are we doing that in my company? We're doing parts of it.
Okay.
Do we need to improve on it? For sure.
Okay, so to that point then, where are you investing at the moment within the company that you feel you're deriving real value?
So I started with this company 4 years ago, and I kind of look at it as how do I evolve the maturity of a company as it relates to the data. So we had to do some foundational stuff at the beginning. Define a strategy, define roles, how are we going to move things, build a machine, how are we going to move things throughout the pipeline, what's our goal with that, look at the use cases that we need to implement, pick the ones that align mostly to where we're going as a company. Because if you don't align to the company goals, then you're just, you know, how do you measure return and you're actually helping the company? Because at the end of the day, it's really about the bottom line for the company, right?
Yeah.
You know, everybody's aligned to a P&L item. So I think, so that's what we did the first few years, is aligning that and doing some initial building, right? Now, as it's maturing and people are using the same language, we can continue down that narrative of better conceptual metadata, better master data management. We talked about that, and you know I hate that word, you know, it's a buzzword, but conceptually I like that concept of that. And so the things that we're looking at 2018 to kind of move us even more mature throughout the use cases that we're working on.
And how has the change taken within the organization? Was that hard work?
No, it's always hard work, but it's also it's a change, right? So as a chief data officer, I believe that you have to be analytical, but you also have to be change oriented. You have to be able to tell the story. You got to be able to communicate what's next, how it aligns to the organization. You have to create buy-in.
Yeah.
Because if no one buys in and you want to make a change, there is no change, right? And so you could get buy-in at the bottom organically, or you get it at the top. And so I like to play in both those arenas to tell the right story. Not a made up story, but the right story and how this all fits and where the benefits could come out. So that's kind of, that's been my approach with change.
And so where would you feel that you would you're not spending enough in that regard?
So I think where I need improvements, which we all do, and it's good to do that. You know, for me, I do spend a lot of time with my executive partners, understanding where we're going and telling that story. We're moving as fast as we can within our budget constraints. I'd like to kick it up a little bit and see what more magic we can do along the way. Some things are, one thing that I wish I could change, and I don't know, I'm still working on that, is the ownership. And I think we may talk about ownership here a little bit later. When I first came into the organization, what's the first thing you do when you start managing data? You notice the gaps, you notice the problems, and then everybody blamed our team for the problems. I kind of like that, because then now we're getting people talking, and then once we start creating transparency on where the problems go, it did create a little disruption, but then we all kind of come back together to make it move forward. So there is a little disruption in that process, and so you know, that's gone pretty well.
So that would speak to the next question somewhat, in terms of how do you see legacy companies keeping up with the more pure play web-only companies, the startups, the fintechs?
Right, and so they're completely different business models. In some way, the startups have some benefits that they can move faster. I'm an insurance company. It's really hard to do a startup insurance company because it's a very highly regulated industry, and you have to have a huge balance sheet to even start, because you got to be able to make sure you can pay your future claims. But when I look at the startups, the web-based stuff, I look at high transactions, low volume. And so if they create an MVP that could be used, and if it doesn't quite work right, that's okay, because I only invested $5 in it, and I know they're making it work, and it's okay. But if I have an insurance product that I'm asking someone to put their life savings into, Yeah, that MVP has a different meaning. It needs to be pretty solid. Thus, the legacy companies have to invest much more money into getting a new product out than a startup company because of all those hurdles and all the history and all the regulation.
Yeah.
So we would, if we go direct to consumer or however we may, our strategy is, that's a huge investment for us.
How much does that have to do with sort of combining data from legacy infrastructure with new, more modern, unstructured databases and other tools?
We have an admin system that was built like early 70s, late 60s. And so the database structure in that admin system is basically files, right? And then, so to get data out of the files, we write interface programs and stuff. That's how it was today. Whereas going tomorrow, it'll be different. We're going to have that integration layer that's going to create that middle layer of the supply chain that we talked about, data quality and stuff, to manage that much better than it is today. That's one of the things I need to invest in is, all right, we did a lot of stuff on this end, now we go back to the source system and create that same middle layer for them. So, but if the middle layer is done right, it doesn't really matter what the source data is. The source data is the source data. It should be plug and play from that perspective. It's the metadata, it's the quality rules, it's that middle layer before it goes to the demand that's critical to all of that. And then I don't care if I have 50 databases or 2, and I don't care if it's a dupe or a file. But what I was starting to say though is our original admin system's all file-based, and then the industry goes, all right, we need to create relational databases because that's how we're going to access it. And then all of a sudden we go to Hadoop. Guess what? We're going to go unstructured in documents. Well, those documents are basically files, which are very similar to the way that they were in the mainframe world. Right. It's very, it kind of comes around.
So in a modern organization then, who should own the data?
So my view of that changed. So I think when as I was working data governance at my prior company with our head of data governance, and as I started this new role, I assumed that the people that created the data owned the data, and it was very, very simple. So I started creating structure on who's the originator of data. Most of the time data is created by a person, especially in my industry. They key it in or they make changes in some sort or another. Well, the reality is that that's hard to push. That's hard to create ownership there on those individuals that are creating data. They could be some of the lower paying people in my organization that now all of a sudden I'm going to put these rules and feedbacks and they'll be like, screw that, I'm out of here. And so what I do in my group, in our Office of Data group, is we create like a false ownership, a facilitated ownership, where based on our metadata and who consumes and uses and starts it, we will identify where the data flows, automatically and stuff, and what data quality comes out of it. And we facilitate the changing from the end to the beginning of the life cycle of data. And so we create this false ownership where we don't really own it, but we create that layer that would help people from that ownership point of view, but we have the metrics of who we need to go to and how we make the changes. So we don't really say one person owns it.
So how does that present itself then on an organizational chart, for instance?
So say we consume data from the actuaries that have developed projections, and they want their projections to be consumed and managed like any other data asset, right, and then reported on. So when we notice that things have changed in their cash flows or there's data quality issues in that, we then go backwards in the lineage and go back and facilitate a conversation with the actuaries. Because they know they're part of that lineage and part of that ownership chain, they will make sure that what they are doing is controlled and locked down. And part of that is documented, right? But sometimes you still need some people to do some research. Data's fluid like water, so sometimes you go where the data takes you. Yeah. If you notice that their assumptions are correct, then we continue to go backwards into the source system, and we bring in the individuals at that time. So we have all that matrix, that ownership matrix documented, so we know to go to where we are in the pipeline.
Okay, so how, for instance, does the organization adapt itself to changes or trends like artificial intelligence or deep learning? Would you feel like your organization would be fit for purpose or would be capable?
I think the answer should be yes. I think that we have some, insurance is usually not the leading edge of technology when it comes to some of that. Yeah. We have a great CEO, and he has vision to kind of take us more up to date, digitize our platforms, digitize our data, create an AI layer. If we start working with consumers, it's not scalable for every consumer. if we go straight to them to pick up a phone call and talk to a person, because then that you're only scalable by the number of people that you have. So we want to create some chat box and stuff, which is a little bit of AI behind the scene.
Yeah, yeah.
And so and then how actually ironically our investments are algorithmic. Part of it is algorithmic, proprietary. I can't speak of that or I'll tell you.
Okay.
No one else is
Fair,
here,
fair.
so I think it's good. No one
No
knows
one's
about
listening.
that. No one's listening, so that works out well. So we do incorporate some of that, and our goal is to incorporate a little bit more. But that's all I can tell you.
Great. Okay. Enough said. So where would you see yourself then? First off, the company itself, and then yourself within the next 5 to 10 years. How do you see?
See how that evolving?
Yeah.
So I like to think of maturity. Not maturity, because that's probably never going to happen.
Older, yeah.
I look at my dad, and he's not mature, so
Okay.
it's not going to happen.
Good.
I feel sorry for my wife. But anyway, so data maturity, as it evolves, data is so fluid that it's really hard to put full structure around what your strategy is. So I see the strategy changing. I still think there's gaps in the market. There's gaps around identifying all your data. There's gaps to identifying especially all the sensitive data.
Yeah.
And there's gaps to really even measure how data impacts your bottom line. So I see that evolving as the industry evolves over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think it's going to take us places that we can't imagine. It's going to be pretty awesome.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for today. You've been given great insight. Really appreciate your honest and transparent view on things, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
This is awesome. I appreciate it. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bob.
It's good. Good talking to you. Thanks, Ryan.